There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello, BookTube. I'm Sean of Sean Breeze Books. Welcome to my channel and another Friday Reads. I have to just say from the get-go here that I really feel this week that I've got my reading mojo back. I've had a wonderful reading week. I have lots to tell you about. In fact, I have so many books to tell you about that despite today being literally the first Friday of 2024 where the weather was nice enough that I could go out and film it outside, I have too many books to carry, and that was just going to be too much. Because yesterday, you may have seen, and I'll be talking about it quite a little bit later in today's episode, in today's Friday Reads, I filmed a book review outside, and I ended up walking so far to find a place that was away from noise. Like there were no snow blowers, or not, well, leaf blowers in this season, but there were a lot of lawnmowers out, and there was one regular spot that a couple musicians were making very lovely music, but practicing I can't even remember what they were. I think they might have been violins outdoors. I ended up having to walk all the way to the library, which is where I was planning to go anyway, and then I was so happy to find a place that was quiet enough to film it that I didn't pay too much attention to the fact that I was just sitting in front of the library and it wasn't much of a natural view behind me. But anyway, that's all fine. I just didn't want to deal with any of that today while lugging a bag of heavy books. So I don't think I have much personal news. Do I? No, I don't have personal news this week. All I've really done is read or do other bookish things. So I think that's why I'm indescribably happy today. I just feel kind of back in the bibliophiliac saddle, to coin a phrase that really rolls trippingly off the tongue. Without further ado, let's meet this week's wonderful mystery guest. And this week's mystery guest is a local Saskatoon writer, Jacqueline Morgan, who I have crossed paths with because she's got her finger in every literary pie in town. Jacqueline, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
It's so great to finally meet you. You and I have exchanged emails when you're wearing your hat at the time you were the publicist for Thistledown Press, a local publishing company, and I understand you've since been promoted to, what's your new title?
Director of Marketing at Thistledown
Director
Press.
of Marketing. All bow down in reverence. How fabulous. And we're not going to talk much about what you do there, other than to say it was in preparation for the Sharon Butala launch of her latest novel, Leaving Wisdom, that Jacqueline and I started exchanging emails. And then after that, from a totally other direction, I found out she's actually a local writer too. So tell us about your writing, Jacqueline.
Yeah, of course. So I have an MFA in writing from the University of Saskatchewan here, which is kind of when I started getting into the writing community. I was really fortunate to take Guy Vanderheg's creative writing class in my last year. Yeah, in my last year of undergrad. It was fantastic. But that introduced me to a lot of writers in the local area. And what I predominantly do is write young adult fantasy novels. That's what I actually wrote for my thesis for my master's. But lately I've been working on dystopian short story collection, which is a bit of a shift for me. I've always been geared to novels, not short stories, but it's been a really, really fascinating and fun challenge to work on.
It's really exciting to talk with a writer who's at the very beginning of their career. So you don't have any books published, and I can't wait for them to come out. And I'm going to pre-book you to come back on to talk about
Sounds
them
great.
when they come out. So you are not only for your job, but just in terms of the literary community here, you're really well connected. So how would you describe the writing community in Saskatoon?
Oh, whenever I talk about it to someone, I just talk about how vibrant it is and how I didn't know about it until I took that class with Guy Vanderheg, and I met so many amazing writers from so many different backgrounds and ages. And actually, I'm still in a writing group with 3 of them from that class. We started a writing group in that class, and we've been meeting ever since, and it's been wonderful. The community is vibrant, but it's so interconnected. Like there's so many people I know personally that also have their hands in so many different pies. I've been fortunate to be a first reader with Grain magazine in the province, and that's because
Yes.
well, not because, but I met uh, the editor at the time through my MFA in writing program. Like it's such a close-knit community, and there's so much talent here. I get so excited about it whenever I have the chance to get involved.
It's fantastic because I think that how I found out that you were a writer was you were on the roster for a I can't remember exactly who was sponsoring it or what, but it was a literary reading about 6 months ago, perhaps, or maybe less,
Yeah,
at St.
yeah.
Andrews College.
hmm So that
Yeah,
was
and it,
the Writing North conference in
yeah,
January. That was it's collaborative between the MFA in writing program and the Saskatchewan Writers Guild. And yeah, I was featured as part of like a special alumni showcase on the first night. A bunch of alumni of the program got to read their work, and it was wonderful. I got to reunite with some people I had in my program that I hadn't seen in a little bit, and meet some new faces that I hadn't known before that time, and made some new friends. So it was
wow.
wonderful.
So you probably know all the local Saskatoon literary gossip, don't you?
I wouldn't go quite that far, but I'm quite connected, I like to think.
Well, I hope someday you'll give me a scoop, Jacqueline.
I'll work on it for you.
You and I also exchanged emails, again, not to get into your day job at all, but about David Carpenter, because his
Mhm.
latest book, what is that called? Something about rattlesnakes.
I never met a rattlesnake I didn't like.
I never met a rattlesnake I didn't like.
Mhm.
He recorded the audiobook of that, and
Yes,
you were
yeah.
involved in that. And so we exchanged emails then. So
Mhm.
do you know David Carpenter?
I've met him a couple times, but not personally. He also was the featured speaker at my friend's convocation, and that
Oh,
just lives in my mind. It was fantastic. So I'm a fan.
he was a prof of mine back in the day. We're going
Oh
back to
yeah.
the early 1990s, and I've
hmm
gotten reacquainted with him doing this series of interviews. So he's a
Lovely.
wonderful guy and a wonderful
He
writer.
is.
So before we get into the books you're going to recommend, what kinds
Mhm.
of things do you like to read?
Well, I've been kind of expanding my horizons. Growing up, it was pretty much solely like YA fantasy, but especially with this new short story collection I'm working on, which kind of started in my master's program. I hadn't really dived into short stories before. So I've kind of been branching out, but a lot of YA fantasy, like Tamara Pierce is a big author that I really like, and Christopher Paolini. I was a fan of the Harry Potter series growing up. A lot of just magical sword and sorcery kind of genre. And then the Hunger Games came out, and that was a really big influence on me. Still is a big influence on me in my current writing. But I've lately tried to branch out into more graphic novels, and even this isn't a book, but video game writing has been very interesting to me lately as well. So I've been just trying to expand my horizons on all fronts.
Multidisciplinary Jacqueline. Wow, that's great. As you've been writing short stories, have you been reading short stories?
I've been trying to, yeah, I really want to find like linked dystopian short story collections that I can reference, but yeah, I've really been trying to get into science fiction stories just to learn more as much as I can.
And I'm not a big I read some dystopian, but I can't think of a
Mhm.
linked dystopian short story collection, but I bet somebody watching will have a recommendation that maybe will be new to you.
Mhm.
So I'm
Oh, I
inviting
hope
people
so.
to put recommendations for that in the book. And why are why are you specifically looking for a linked short story collection?
So that's actually
What
the
you're
short story
working on?
that I'm working on. Yeah, I've decided because I was fortunate to get the independent artist grant from Sask Arts that I was able to take time off of my from my work so I could devote a lot of time to developing this. And I really this is my novel mind coming in, this approach, but I really wanted to tell an overarching story through multiple perspectives in a short story collection. So I have had recommendations for linked short story collections, just the specifically like dystopian or science fiction that I'm looking for, that I
Yeah,
haven't found.
and I don't have any, but I'm sure somebody will. And
Mm.
so then the next question that I must ask is why not just write a novel then, Jacqueline?
This is really funny. The story that started this collection, I wrote it in my one of my master's classes. It was just like a one of our assignments. I just wrote this story, and everybody told me they wanted to hear more, but I didn't feel that my character had any more to say, but the world did. So I decided to dive into the ways different people experience this world. And it's dystopian, so it's about like an oppressive government and like the rebellion that results from that oppression. So then what I really focused on, and I'm again so grateful that Sask Arts has given me the opportunity to dig into it, is like what hope looks like in that environment and how my first story ended hopeful. And I'm like, well, can it be hopeful for other people in other situations? So yeah, I just felt that that first story was a complete story, and I didn't want to have that character do a full novel arc. I wanted something different from what I usually
Involve
do.
some other characters in some kind of overlappingly related situations or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
So how much has kind of the way the world is now politically or whatever shaped your vision for this writing project, if at all?
Well, I will say that when I was doing research, it was very easy to find reference points for my dystopian narrative, which is kind of upsetting. But I think
Yes.
that also, yeah, I think that just reinforced what I'm trying to do with this collection, like to see what a hopeful turn at the end of a story might look like. I know that's a movement in a lot of speculative spaces. Like if we have the ability to imagine this like better world or different world, why can't we imagine it to be better? So,
Well, this is fascinating, and I'm not a big reader of dystopian, but I have read some that I really liked. I'm
mhm.
actually reading the Booker Prize winning novel from last year that was dystopian. I've had to put it on hold because I was reading too many books at once. But let's see what it. Prophet Song by Paul Lynch is the one I'm
Okay.
reading, although it is on hold. But so I've
Hmm.
read some really good dystopian literature.
Hmm.
But then there's the opposite, which nobody seems to write anymore, which is utopian literature. I mean, that's
Hmm.
really an antiquated form, as far as I understand it. You're envisioning dystopian interlinked stories that have some elements of hope in them. That's fascinating.
Yeah, and that might be like there's probably a smaller categorization of genre that's beyond dystopian. I've heard the term solar punk thrown around as a way of like I don't know if you've heard of cyberpunk. I know that's a big genre, very dark and gritty, like futuristic city urban life kind of vibe, I guess. And I've read solar punk is kind of like envisioning this future where there's a lot of focus on like renewable and sustainable energy sources, so it's a lot like greener and cleaner. So that's kind of a categorization, but right now sticking with dystopia, turning hopeful is kind of my
Well,
current
that
genre
touches.
categorization.
Last question on this project: is it set in Saskatoon or where is it set?
It is not specifically in Saskatoon, but it is kind of a general, like, central climate, I guess. So it is similar in that respect. I have some rolling hills in the area, which is very much not Saskatoon.
Real best of luck with that. That sounds really, really
Thank you.
interesting.
Thank you.
So, what have you brought to tell us about this Jacqueline the Reader?
Well, I have a couple of suggestions. I don't have them with me because I got them
That's
from the
fine.
library. But recently, in my foray into graphic novels, because I found there is a lot of dystopian content in graphic novels, but I came across this one that I think was an award winner very recently. It's Canadian. It's called Ducks, 2 Years in the Oil Sands.
Yes, I have read it.
You've
It's
likely heard of that.
wonderful.
Yeah. It was fantastic. Like I'm very new to graphic novels. It was a wonderful introduction to that that kind of book.
It's a great gateway book for
Hmm.
people that don't read graphic books.
Yeah.
I haven't been a big reader of graphic books, although I had read several before I read it, but it's the one that made me think, there is something here that this genre, this way of telling a story is really quite amazing. And the ending of
Hmm.
that, we won't give it away, but can you
Hmm.
remember the ending? She's back in her hometown in the Maritimes, wherever she was
Yep.
from, and then she runs into a guy that she worked with, and remember her friends say to her,
Hmm.
and it was this chilling ending that I still
Yeah.
carry with me. Yeah, I just
It was
love the way
it
that
was remarkable. Like I finished that and I just had chills like for the rest of the day, and I had to tell everybody about it that they needed to read this
abs
book.
Kate Beaton. Yeah, that's really, really quite
Hmm.
stunning.
And then another one I read this year, which I'm sure everybody has heard about, Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. I know it was an award winner. I listened to the audiobook. Very good. Yes.
Yeah.
I specifically remember the end of a chapter, just the way that they read it gave me chills. And I just needed to stop for a minute and breathe. Another typically post-apocalyptic kind of story that turns to hope
Absolutely.
instead of
Yeah.
like a bleak, depressing future. Just fantastically written. I love the structure of the story. I love the way that the plot develops. It's suspenseful, but it's also heartfelt and it's also beautiful, talking about where the placement or where art should exist after the apocalypse.
I'm so glad you put that back on my radar because I heard so much about it when it came out. And I'm the
Hmm.
kind of reader that if I hear too much about a book, I have to just pull back and
Hmm.
wait for all the hype
Yeah.
to kind of die down and for me to kind of forget what I've heard. But I think maybe now I'm ready. So that's,
Yeah. Highly recommend. Very good read. Well, those were the top two that I thought
yeah.
of most recently. I did have a reference book that I really like because I've been writing a lot about like, really dark and oppressive things. My YA fantasy was about a young woman healing from trauma, and that was I find a lot of my writing focuses on that hopeful trend, the way to move from this dark place to this healing or this healthy or healing space. And I found this book called The Emotional Wound Thesaurus by Angela Ackerman and Becca Puglisi. Probably said that wrong, but they publish a whole line of writer's guides to character development and how somebody, in this case, how somebody might react to different kinds of trauma, like from their parents getting divorced at a young age to like surviving a hurricane kind of thing or a natural disaster. And it really dives into harmful stereotypes or things to consider. And it really broadens your perspective, or my perspective, I should say, for writing this kind of content. And I'm really grateful. One of my committee members of my MFA defense actually recommended it to me. Hmm.
Oh, wow. Very
Hmm.
interesting.
Yeah.
Just before I let you go, Jacqueline, what are you reading now? Or what are you looking forward to reading next?
Well, I've got a whole line of books that I have at the library as well. Kind of in between right now. I'm trying to decide what I want to do next. I think I'm going to dive back into a book I was reading, Land of Milk and Honey by,
Pam Zhang.
yes, yes.
I've heard it's
Because
good.
that felt very relevant to my short story collection. Yeah, I think I might be diving back into that. Or I'll take a break for some fun literature and dive into the Percy Jackson series again, which I
Oh,
grew up on as well. So,
sounds
yeah,
like you're a mood reader.
yes, I kind of
Uh,
am.
that's
After a
great.
number of years of reading lots of content in university, I just kind of go for whatever I want now.
Yeah, well, it took me a long time to recover from not my undergrad was fine, but when I did graduate school as an English
Hmm.
major, as an MA in English, it
Hmm.
took me years to recover just a more spontaneous love of reading, and
Yeah.
finally. finally got back into it. But well, Jacqueline, this is great. I'm so excited about your new collection. I hope that you'll keep in touch and we can do some more collaborations in the future. In the meantime, good luck with everything.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful chatting with you.
Jacqueline is wonderful. That was my first time talking to her. We exchanged emails, and I'm really looking forward to following her career. She's very interesting, and I really enjoyed our conversation. That was great, and I have been a little busy on BookTube this week. Early in the week, I put up the chat with Barb Howard, the Calgary novelist, our second annual novella reading project, where we recommend 3 novellas to each other and then go away and read them and come back several months later. And we're late getting started this year because I've had it kind of a different kind of a year. So I'm late getting everything going. And so we'll come back together in August, but go find out what we're going to be reading on that video. Then I put up a book haul, of course. And then just late last night, I put up a review of this memoir, Committed on Meaning in Madwomen by Suzanne Scanlon. I know it's going to be in my top 5 nonfiction reads of the year. It's one of those transformative reads that only comes along once every few years. I loved it. I tried to do it justice in the review, and that's the other video I put up. I am looking forward to the part 2 discussion on Patreon with my mid and upper tier patrons to discuss the second half of Somerset Maugham's Of Human Bondage. I am 3% away from finishing. I think I'm at 97% mark. And so I won't be talking about it this week, but I am looking forward to talking about it with the Patreon group tomorrow. And I'm going to also be asking them how many more read-alongs they would like to do. I think we have space for at least 2, depending on how long of a book. So I'll be picking their brains about that and announcing then the next Patreon read-along fairly shortly. The only spoiler I'll say about Of Human Bondage is that I got much more invested in the second half, and so it was a very positive experience overall. I guess while I am talking about Patreon, I'm always happy to welcome more support on Patreon. All those details are in the show notes. One of the benefits that all members at any of the 3 tiers get is the chance, the opportunity, should they be interested, in participating in a weekly bookish brunch where I shut up and my patrons talk about what they've been reading recently, and I take the notes and post them on the Patreon website, and there's a good group of people that seem to really enjoy that. We had that last Saturday, so it's been a busy month for Patreon. And now, let me get into the books. I really do think that one of the reasons I'm in such a good mood about my reading week is that I've had 2 bails, and that's kind of more my rhythm. Bailing on something I'm not loving or that doesn't hit me right, for whatever reason, it just frees up a lot of energy to pick up another book. So I've got books that I didn't expect to start because I bailed on 2 and this and that. So I'll tell you about my bails. First, I have 2 bails to tell you about, and I finished 2. Plus, I will finish probably later tonight the third one, Human Bondage. And I've started some, and I will be starting some. So let's get into it. My first bail this week was that Korean novel that I got from the library last week, Spring on the Peninsula by Shin, written in English. It was awful. I read 6 pages, and and then I encountered this sentence. That last phrase, who knows what that phrase was about, doesn't matter. That last phrase was memorable, a slow, billowing premonition, an unease that came down with such heft that I became flatulent most of the time, and I couldn't read another word. I closed the book in a huff and thought, I don't know what's happening with some of the young'uns that are putting out books. So I didn't get very far with that. I have also, quite shockingly to my own self, bailed on Blackouts by Justin Torres. It won a big prize last year, the National Book Award, I believe, and I am a huge fan of his debut, We the Animals, and I didn't like this at all. But there were several strikes against it, just in terms of things that I can't deal with, don't like, when I'm reading a physical book and or an audiobook. So I started it as an audio text combo. I paid good money for the audiobook. Like I paid over $20 US, I think, for the audiobook. I think I'm going to stop buying audiobooks because so many of so many of them are awful. I just have to say, there's just, and I mean, it's very subjective, but I do feel like ranting a bit about how awful so many audiobooks are. And this one was particularly bad. So I abandoned that. And then I was left with this. I remember when I hauled it, I told you all about how beautiful it was, and it is a beautiful book. But it's printed in a kind of pale brown font that I found really hard to read. So that was the next strike against it. And then there were pages and pages of italic font, and that did me in. When I got halfway through and realized how much I was struggling with the italic font, I bailed. There were some interesting things about it, but I didn't connect with it at all. So I didn't finish it. I will link to Lindy's wrap-up in one of her Friday reads, because she connected with it extremely deeply. She connected with it as deeply as I expected that I would. And so do go check out her thoughts for an alternative view. But it was not a book for Sean of Sean Breathes books. Yeah, so that freed up some space in my 15 books maximum current reads new reality. But those were the bails. So yes, committed on Meaning and Madwomen by Suzanne Scanlon. I finished it, I think, on Monday. This was a buddy read over 3 weeks with Heidi of My Reading Life, and we both loved it. I was blown away by it. I don't think Heidi was blown away by it, but she did very much enjoy it. Suzanne Scanlon was my mystery guest a few weeks ago. I'll put a link to that. But, oh my God. I can't wait to try some of her fiction, because this book is one that's really going to stay with me. That's all I'm going to say here. I have a full review. And Suzanne Scanlon uses her own experience of having been institutionalized for almost 3 years in the early 90s in a psychiatric institution as kind of a gateway into writing about so many other issues. It's an absolutely wonderful book. I finished the last story today, and this was a buddy read with Joe Smith, and this is one of the best short story collections I've ever read. Edward P. Jones is one of the best writers alive. I absolutely adored his one novel, The Known World. 4 or 5 years ago, Brian of Bookish and I buddy read his other short story collection, Lost in the City, and I have to say that one hasn't stuck in my memory. But The Known World sure has, and now Joe and I have finished all Aunt Hagar's Children. This was just incredible. Like his first short story collection, Lost in the City, these stories are mainly, almost exclusively set in Washington. All of the characters that are in Washington, they're like first or second generation going back to the American South. And so there's a lot about their southern origins and scenes that go back to South Carolina or Mississippi or wherever. But this is very much a short story collection set in Washington. And when I say set in Washington, I have to put this down, it's heavy. I mean that Edward P. Jones imbues his stories with meaning based on the streets and intersections in Washington, which mean nothing to me, but that's okay, because Edward P. Jones informs you of the meaning. These streets and avenues and cross-sections of Washington, D.C. mean to the characters in an almost, I would say, mythological sense. I'm not comfortable with that word, but there are extended scenes, and some of them go actually back to the American South. The last story in particular, called Tapestry. But most of them are about characters walking down long streets or imagining themselves walking down Washington streets, or being at a crossroads and deciding which street to go down. And then Edward P. Jones uses that walk or imagined walk or choice of which street to walk on as a way to deepen his story with all kinds of characters and past experiences and micro-narratives. It just made my head spin. It's just wonderful. Oh my God. So these are African-American characters, and so it's about African-American communities. There are a few white characters in the short stories, which was a nice change, and just rich explorations of love and sexuality and adultery and economic hardship and history. If you want to read quality literary short stories and you've read all of Alice Munro, I would say Edward P. Jones is just a little bit down on the totem pole for me. He's a master. And I wish he was still writing books. He's still with us. I don't know anything about what he's doing, but he's not putting out books recently. This was incredible. So that's what I finished. Now, I've also put one on hold, which opened up further space on my current reads. And that is Edith Wharton's A Sun at the Front. This was to be for kind of a book club discussion with Chris of the Book Cougars, Dorian Stuber, and James Morrison. And there's just been some scheduling conflicts that we've decided to bump it kind of quite far into the future. We don't even know when we'll read it, but it's really hard with 4 busy people to make the schedule work. So we were planning to talk about it at the end of this month, and it just didn't work for certain people. So we're just putting it on indefinite hold, and so I can't let this take up space on my very small... I'm only allowed to read 15 books at a time, so this one's going on hold, and I'll pick it back up when we do make a schedule. I was enjoying it, actually quite a bit more than Summer, which I didn't much care for, but this one was starting out to be quite a Sean novel. So I have so much space on my current reads, I'm going to go nuts. Actually, no, I'm not going to go nuts, but hang tough. Let me also briefly tell you 2 books that I've started. I told you I was going to start Blue Postcards by Douglas Bruton, and I did. I've barely started. I'm on page 10, and these are numbered paragraphs. I think I've read the first 7 numbered paragraphs. So all I can say is I'm already mesmerized by it. The story has so scarcely gotten started that I really can't say much more than that, but I do know from talking with Douglas Bruton, I'll link to that incredible conversation in the show notes, that it revolves around, or one of the characters in the story is the French artist Yves Klein. But so far I've met Henri, who is the last tailor on this particular street. I think this one is going to be a very rich read. This is a pseudo-buddy read with Lindy, and in fact I think Lindy and I are going to be having a conversation with Douglas Bruton about the novels sometime next month. And because of my bails, I thought, well, Sean, what were you just whining about in your Friday reads last week? You were whining about the fact that there's books that are kind of fallen off your radar because you haven't kept up with certain of your reading passions, and one of them that I specifically talked about was Rosamond Lehmann. So I thought, well, there's space now. So I picked up her next novel in the chronological order I'm reading them, Invitation to the Waltz, and started it. Oh, it's starting out so good. This was originally published in 1932. So this is her 3rd published novel. So I have read Dusty Answer, her debut, 1927, A Note in Music, 1930, and I started with, and this often happens, the same thing happened with Elizabeth Jane Howard. I started with one of her later novels and loved it so much that I went back to the beginning. So I started with Rosamond Lehmann's works with her 1953 novel, The Echoing Grove, which may well have been her final novel. There was other books that came out, or her penultimate novel. Actually, this one has grabbed me from the opening chapter in a way that the other books, A Dusty Answer and A Note in Music, didn't. Like, it took a while for me to get into it and kind of get invested. I've already invested with, it's a, can we say, nuclear family, British family, with an eccentric dad, kind of a no-nonsense mum with a humorous streak that only comes out once or twice and shocks her family when it does, that has already fascinated me. 2 teenage girls, a brother, and an even more eccentric uncle who shows up a lot for family dinners. And I don't think I'm going to say anything more than that, but I just was grabbed by the family scene and each character, and they jumped off the page in the first couple chapters, so this is starting out great. All right, so I'm not going to fuss about explaining all the numbers, but I'm still well within my 15-book limit. In fact, I'm going to start 4 books now. And keeping in mind I have to finish, a couple more chapters at the end of Human Bondage, and there's a big space. I'm not going to completely fill it. I'm going to bring it up to 14. I'm going to leave a little bit of space for some breathing room because there's some books that are on my current reads that I haven't been picking up recently, and I want to rectify that. But here are the 4 books I'm going to be starting this week. Oh, it just feels like my chaotic reading life on a smaller scale, but my chaotic reading life is back to normal. The next buddy read that Joe Smith and I are embarking upon, it was one that she very much wanted to read, and I had a rubber arm that she twisted. So it's a gay novel from Germany, I believe. The Love of Singular Men by Victor Heringer. Translated, oh, not German at all, Sean. Translated from the Portuguese by James Young. So who the heck is Victor Heringer? He was born in Rio de Janeiro in 1988. Oh, he's very young. I didn't know anything about this book, other than that it's gay. Oh, he's died already. 2018. God, he wasn't very old. So it's a Brazilian gay novel. All right. Don't need to know anything else going in. The next book that Heidi of My Reading Life and I are going to be buddy reading is one of my most anticipated releases of the year, Fire Exit by Morgan Talty. This was in my book haul last week so that I could get it up in a book haul video before I started reading it. Morgan Talty is the author of the fantastic short story collection from last year, Night of the Living Res. He's a very friendly guy who notices and comments on my videos every time I mention him on my channel, so I'm looking forward to... Well, he's a little busy this week because this book just launched, so he may give it a miss this week, but I've heard really good things about this, and I don't want to really know what it's about. It's set on the Penobscot Reservation in Maine, like his short story collection. The early reviews are rave reviews, and Heidi and I are really excited to dive in. Sonia, of An Enthusiastic Reader, and I are frequent buddy readers. Heidi and Joe, we just read back-to-back books continuously and have been doing so for years. And if I had the bandwidth, I would want to do the same with Sonia. I don't have the bandwidth, and maybe she doesn't either, but we buddy read 4 or 5 books a year, and we are going to read, I think it came out last year, this Irish novel, Soldier Sailor by Claire Kilroy, which has also gotten rave reviews. And it's the author's first novel for over a decade. I have not heard of Claire Kilroy. She has written 4 previous ones. And this is about motherhood. What else do I need to know going in? Can't wait. So, to bring it up to 14 and still leave one blank so that I am not only reading 14 books at one time, I couldn't not add this one. There are so many other books that I want to read, but this is the one that just is beckoning to me the most right now. So, based on the incredibly stimulating mystery guest chat from last week, I'm going to start Birding by Rose Ruane. She was my mystery guest last week. If you wonder why I'm so excited to be starting her debut novel, or no, her second novel just came out about a month or so ago, just watch even 5 minutes of the mystery guest chat. But once you watch the first 5 minutes, you're going to want to watch the whole thing, because she was very enigmatic, fabulous guest, and this novel sounds wonderful. So I'm going to be starting it so that I can interview her, and hopefully it'll be maybe even, unless somebody beats me to it, it will be her first long-form chat on YouTube about this book. So, now do you understand why I'm so excited and happy? That's my Friday Reads. Thanks for watching.